Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So, given the title of this video, I think the obvious expectation would be talking about questions that you might get when interviewing for a particular role, technical position, things like that. That's actually not what this is about. In the in one of the last videos, I talked about negotiating your compensation. In order to do that, you need to know a lot of different things. And if you go look at that video, there's a bunch of information that you're going to want to get. So I'm not going to go over everything in that previous one, but um, you know, there's going to be a little bit of overlap in terms of like finding out what kind of educational experiences you can get through an employer, things like that. So what this is talking about the kind of questions that you should ask when interviewing, right? So I think one of the big misnomers, one of the big kind of things that people get wrong during interviews is they think of it as they are being interviewed for a position, as opposed to they're interviewing you and you're interviewing them, right? So it's a two-way street. You're looking at if you're a good fit for this position and if this position is a good fit for you. So this is a list of some questions. I sort of compiled this after looking at a number of different sort of other kind of websites that had various different lists. So this is sort of an amalgamation of a whole bunch of different things. And check out how fancy these slides are. Not too bad. So we're going to start off with how would you describe the responsibilities of the position? And I think another sort of kind of version of this that you might want to look at is sort of like what's an example of a day in the life of this position, right? So you get an idea of like what are you actually going to be doing? Because sometimes a position will be described one way and then you'll end up doing very different things. So you want to have that really clearly defined. The next one that I think is really important if you're going to be in an admin kind of role, sysadmin, sysengineering kind of role, some kind of IT role, is to figure out how much break fix work there is versus project works. And if you're not familiar with the terms around this, break fix is like literally something's broken, so you gotta fix it, or sort of the mundane kind of minutia of stuff. So I look at a lot of things in terms of infrastructure engineering, storage kind of stuff. So that might be, how often are you provisioning storage? How often are you dealing with hardware replacements or upgrades or things like that, as opposed to project work, which is more like, let's automate things, right? So instead of me creating a volume for a customer because they need to have X amount of space, how much time am I going to be able to spend writing a script or like a web interface to let them do that themselves, right? So kind of taking it from that perspective. Because if you're too in the weeds, if you're spending all day putting out fires, you're never going to have a chance to, really going to make any headway with things. So that's the first one. So I already covered this one a little bit. I think it's probably, I could remove this one, but, what are the responsibilities of the position? How would you describe a typical day? Pretty close. So I'll just skip over this one. I probably should have taken that one out. So this is a good one, right? Is this a new position? If not, what did the previous employee go on to do? So if they stayed at the company, made a move to a different group or, got promoted, something like that, that's good to know. If they bailed and they went somewhere else, doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad role. They could have gotten, some more money in a different position or better benefits, or they moved or whatever it was. But it's not a bad thing to ask because it gives you some information about, whether this position is something that somebody else was satisfied with. And we're humans. I think as much as we like to think of ourselves as these, unique, one-off individuals, we're much more similar, I think, than we oftentimes admit. So that's a good one. What's the company's management style? Super important. Also, I'm going to touch on this in another one. Who is the manager that you would be reporting to, and getting a chance to meet them. So this is something you probably would want to ask sort of generally, but also more specifically when you met that manager. So, a lot of people micromanage, especially in IT. They want to micromanage. And if you're early in your career, that may actually be a very useful thing. You may not know exactly what you're supposed to do in a sysengineering role or as a junior admin, things like that. So there's going to be a little bit of hand-holding. But as you go further in your career, a lot of times what you want to do is you want to be able to kind of look at what is going on and make your own determination about what the best use of your time is, right? And if you get somebody who really wants to micromanage, and you need to document absolutely everything that you did and report to them multiple times a day, it's going to make it a lot harder to be satisfied in that role. But also, if you're, once you're sort of working at a high level, you need to concentrate on things. And every single time you get interrupted to do a status update or something like that, that's a sort of a cognitive switch. And there's something called a context switching penalty that is a fairly well known thing. Basically, if you're working on one project and then you need to go switch to something else, it takes you about 15 minutes or so. That's sort of the maximum. But it takes about 15 minutes, let's say, to get back into the mindset of where you were originally working and back to being productive. Which is why email and Slack and things like that are such terrible things in a lot of ways. Maybe that's something we'll talk about in another video. But when you're working as a developer or sysengineer or DevOps kind of role, something like that, one of the things that can be very, very useful is to carve out specific times that you're paying attention to email, or you're going to be on, chat or whatever it is, and then just be off of those otherwise, so that you can go ahead and concentrate on stuff. What is the average employee retention? Not only for the company, but also for this particular team or department. So, one of the interesting things that really was put as sort of a focal point when I came on board at Microsoft is their retention on average at that point, or they phrased it in an interesting way. They said their goal for employee retention was 10 years. And that tells you a lot about how satisfied people are with a company. Now, what I probably should have asked is, are you meeting that goal? Because I think actually a year later, they had a report where the retention at that point was like, 2.5, 3 years. So, very different things. But traditionally, it was about 10 years at Microsoft. So they compensated people pretty well and had a lot of good benefits. So people stayed. Whereas if you're, in a company and they're a complete shit show, and you've got terrible bosses and really bad culture and stuff like that, you're going to bail. You're not going to stick around. It might take you a little while to find a new gig, but you're probably not going to be there 5 years. You're probably going to be there like a year or two. So if you start looking at, employee retention, for the department or team, and that's, like 2 years or less, I'm not going to say rule it out, but it's something definitely to consider. And if you have a boss or somebody or that you're interviewing with who says they don't know that information, that's completely fine. Their human resources department does know that. So you can have them follow up with you. And if they don't follow up with you about it, that'd be a little bit of a red flag for me. You want to know that kind of thing. So, let's see this one. Sure why that one is. Let's zoom out a little bit. Okay. So I think this one was who is the person who currently has this position, and can I meet them before making my decision? Sort of goes back to the management thing as well. Not sure why that was sort of shrunk, but excuse me. So why is this position available? kind of goes to what we were talking about before, like what happened to the person who was in it previously. Maybe you're growing the team. Maybe they're, somebody moved on to a different department or promoted, or maybe it's a new position. How many people work on this team? This is super important for on-call, right? So we talked about this in the previous video that I made on negotiating your compensation, which is, if you're in a very small team, the amount of on-call work that you're probably going to be doing is fairly high. If you're on a larger team, you're going to have a much lower percentage of on-call time. So that's definitely something to kind of figure out. Also kind of goes to break fix. And, if you get an idea of the scope of work, that can give you information. Travel. Right? Some people like to have travel. Some people want to stay at home, but is it expected? And if it is, how much travel are you going to have? Likewise, how much on-call are they expecting? And this is a separate question here, but it's not a bad idea to sort of take this other one into account. How many people work on this team, and then how much on-call? So if they say, oh, we're really not expecting very much on-call, it's pretty minimal here. And then they say that, oh, there's 4 people on the team. It's like, well, if I'm not doing on-call, who is? And how does that work? And are you being honest about it? One of the things that I hear a lot is, if you're interviewing for positions, is that, well, we've got a 4-person team, but you almost never get called, right? It's very, very rare that you'll get a call. Maybe you get 2 or 3 calls a month, in terms of escalations. Well, assuming that they actually know that, because they may not. And usually the people doing the on-call are much more familiar with how often they're getting called at the managers. The managers will oftentimes sort of, sugarcoat things a little bit. So that's the first piece. But the second one is that may not be the case next year, right? Let's say that you guys do a major software update and it's really bad. That's just because there's not very much on call now doesn't mean that there's going to be, not much a year from now. Professional development opportunities, things like certs and tuition reimbursement. Tuition reimbursement is one that I find a lot of people don't really know about. Why is that being weird? Tuition reimbursement is something that I think a lot of people don't realize is an option, especially if you're really early on in your career. Let's say you're going to just regular college. You might want to get a gig doing help desk. And that help desk may not pay very much in terms of your salary, but a lot of companies have policies where they will do tuition reimbursement. And if you're making, let's say like a B average, and your, degree is related to what you're doing for work, a lot of times the companies will just straight up pay for college. And those policies are usually written in such a way that they don't specifically call out individual job roles. They're designed so that you can retain high-level engineers, or you can take somebody who's in sort of a mid role and then, get them up to a higher level role. But if you're a help desk and that's a company-wide policy, that could be really, really useful. I mean, if you're making $15 an hour on paper, that's not really all that much money. But if all of a sudden it's also paying off, $30,000-$40,000 a year in school, that's a whole different level of compensation that you might have access to that you may not realize. And I may actually just make a video about this separately, because I feel like that's such a useful life hack. If you are a little bit younger, if you're in, college, I mean, man, if you could spend a couple hours a week, part-time gig, or maybe even just sort of stretch it out to do a full-time gig, if you could fit it in and take the hit, and then graduate with no college debt. I know that some of you guys that live in different countries are going to be like, this is crazy. That's an American problem. Maybe. But for those of you guys that live in the US, that could be a really, 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 really useful thing. So, what are the biggest technical challenges in this organization? So that's going to give you not only the big picture for like what are the big projects kind of coming down the pipeline, but it'll also give you some visibility into what the person who is interviewing you thinks are the important stuff. What's the most important thing I should accomplish in the first 90 days? So that again gives you a lot of information in terms of like what is your actual brass taxes around like let's getting down into what are we doing with this? Like what does this job actually really require me to go do? So that's more information there. How has the company changed over the last few years? So that's always good in terms of, corporate culture, management kind of stuff. Biggest rewards of working for the job and working for the company. That also gives you visibility into what their priorities are, not only as a interviewer, but also as, somebody who you can kind of gauge what their take on things are. So like other answers, I love working in this company. And they're like, what are the biggest rewards? Well, they don't charge us for coffee. It's like, that's, if you're working in tech, that's not really that big of a benefit. Do they have free massages? Like those are, not always, but if let's say you're, kind of where I live and you're out in California, and you work in tech, usually the perks are pretty nice. So something like free coffee, that might give an indication that this person's expectations are fairly low. Similarly, what is the best part of working for this company? Right? Give you an idea of what their kind of expectations and priority are, but also sort of will give you some good information about, inferring information from the answer, right? So if they're all about like, oh man, the technical challenges that you get to do at this company, the involvement in the day to day. Well, okay, so you can also sort of read that as like, all right, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Like this might be a place where you could put out a lot of fires, or like there's a lot of churn going on right now. Whereas if they're like, oh, the people here are phenomenal, that may mean that there's less going on that's technically interesting, but maybe they have a good corporate culture, stuff like that. Least favorite part of working here. This is a good way to sort of get an honest bit of information about the company. Now, granted, they're not going to be like, man, my boss is a blah, blah, blah. But you can get some information about, what are their personal gripes. And a lot of times those will be things that, you might have an issue with as well. So I think that's the last one on the list. I think a really kind of cool thing to do, especially for those of you guys who've been, in the industry for a while, is, what kind of questions would you also be asking? This is not a comprehensive list. This is just to sort of get the ball rolling. And I think a decent idea when you're going in, you're interviewing, is to sort of write down your own list of questions beforehand that you can get an idea of, what do you want to go ask on an interview. Another really useful thing about this stuff is, let's say, for example, you get a question about a topic that you are not super familiar with, or something that you want to kind of shift away from. You can always say, actually that kind of reminds me of something, or, before we get into that, this sort of just popped in my head and I don't want to, punt the question, but I'll forget this if I don't ask it right now. And then you ask them your question. And there's a decent chance that they will forget to kind of come back to that. Or while they're answering one of these questions, it buys you time to think about your answer a little bit more. So that can be a really, really useful thing as well. So that is it for the video. Just like we talked about in some of the most recent ones, we're getting towards the end of the month. And as a lot of you guys may be aware, I'm running a 100 subscriber contest. So if you guys are interested, you've got a couple more days where you can go ahead and pick one of my videos. link to it on social media, and then give a link to that in a Google Docs form. I think right now there's only 2 people that are signed up for it. So if you do so, you get a very good chance of winning a Raspberry Pi Zero. And that's probably gonna be the last contest I will do until we get to 500 viewers, or subscribers, I should say. And I don't expect that to be a huge amount of time, given that in the last like week or two since I posted the 200 subscriber video, we're up another 75 or so. So probably gonna hit 300 pretty quick, and yeah, just kind of keep it going. So I mean, thank you guys for subscribing. By the way, if you are, obviously if you hate the videos, don't subscribe. But if you like them, subscribe. It's been a really cool experience to kind of see a little bit of a kind of a community forming, and getting feedback on these videos and stuff like that. It's sort of a neat thing. I hope they're useful. I try to do my best to make them interesting. And if you have specific topics or things that you'd like to hear me talk about, feel free to suggest them. But I think for this video, if you like it, obviously click the like button and subscribe if you're interested in the channel. But if you've got other good questions to ask during interviews, what do you ask? I think that'd be a cool thing to find out, that we can all sort of share. And then hopefully some of the folks who are a little bit newer in the industry can kind of learn from that. And yeah, have a great day. See you guys next time.